Hello, listeners. If you haven't liked, subscribed, or followed the Sounds of Living podcast accounts, you could find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Patreon at Sounds of Living Podcast. Any donation would be greatly appreciated to help support my journey of taking Sounds of Living around the United States. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Sounds of Living. I'm your host today, Alex Kellerman, and I'm sitting here with Christina Clark. Christina, say what's up.
Hi, what's up?
How are you?
I'm good.
So why don't you tell everybody how you and I know each other?
Well, you're a friend of my son's. I think we met initially maybe 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, it had to been like when
At
he was in
least.
or when he was in high school, right? Because it wasn't until after we had been friends for a bit.
Correct. So I think the first time I really have a memory of you was at the farm when I was living there, and we had trucks back there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was one of the other guys' trucks, but remember you doing like a flip
Oh,
off
yeah.
of the tailgate of
Yeah.
the truck?
I forgot about that.
And it was also a day, like I had brought home one of my clients because he was in a really dark space. And I knew you guys were throwing a party. And I'm like, hey, I'm just bringing him in. He was, closer to your age than mine by far. But I remember seeing you just doing the flip. I'm like, wow. And I remember asking you, I'm like, how many drinks have you had? And you're like, no, I'm just high on life. You're that dude. I love it, So
It's funny how that all worked out, because I remember coming and like meeting so many different types of people when I'd go to Colin's.
Oh, I call my kids collectors. I have 2 kids. They're both grown at this point. But growing up, I think that they both had this sensitivity of not having a huge need to be with the in crowd. They were both very comfortable being unique and having a variety of friends. They didn't have like you had to be X, Y, and Z to be a friend. You just had to be a good person to them.
And I felt like that was kind of like the type of energy that we got from band when we met initially. And it just kind of carried on throughout the random people that we would encounter throughout high school and college and, after college. And, I feel like the coolest people that I've met have been somehow connected to Colin in some way.
Colin is connected to, he knows more people. It's crazy. And then what I love about it is just the variety of people, and it's fascinating. And I love it. I love the inclusivity of it.
Yeah.
So
I do too. So Christina, why don't you tell everyone about who you are, what your impact of music has been for you, just an overall summary of who's Christina Clark.
Friends and family tend to call me Chris. I go by Christina in my work mode because I'm a massage therapist and it's a non-ambiguous name, and that makes people feel more comfortable. I have 2 kids that are, both grown. I'm divorced. I'm on my own by choice. Music has always played in the background to me. There's been several threads throughout my life that have been always there, I guess, in a supporting role emotionally, and that's been music and animals, I guess. So you remember me from the days when I had the horses, and Michaela and I, my daughter, would do barrel races, and we would go camping with the horses and had a lot of good times with that. And that time of my life is over because animals pass, and I'm now in the suburbs, not at the farm. But yeah, music has always been kind of like part of the tapestry of my life, and rarely is there a time that there isn't music playing, and when there isn't music playing, it tends to be really intentional. I just want to sit with silence for a minute, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a time to really process what's going on around you.
Yeah, music to me is emotional. It's fun. We have it on the parties. There's the fun music I call the candy music. That's just fun. There's always that one song during the summer that kind of drops and you're like, oh, that's a fun song, and you can't get enough of it. There's music that you're in your feelings at that moment and you really kind of want to amplify it, and then there's the music where you're angry and you want to amplify that, or you need to simmer it down. You've got the playlist for that.
Yeah.
I have those playlists depending on where I'm at emotionally and my mood, or my headspace.
So you always have music that validates how you feel.
Or challenges.
Sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, it
that
depends.
makes sense too. Is it when it challenges it? Is it the whole song? Is it the words? Is it how it's produced? Like, what patterns have you seen?
For me, sometimes I can really get down, and sometimes having, like Bob Marley hit, you're like, oh, okay, it's not all bad.
So you're saying you could be in a mood that would rather be feeling more sad if you're already sad, and you have a completely different genre coming out of the way to pretty much like present this new mood that you're supposed to be feeling, right? Like,
right. Sometimes you can sit in something too long,
Yeah.
and it's really easy to be like, I'm just going to listen to, some heavy, dark music to kind of support the feeling that I'm in. And then at some point, it's like, hold on. Okay, I already feel validated by the music that I've been listening to, and it's been helping me work through stuff, right? Like, I really believe in working through stuff as opposed to glazing over it. But at some point, you have to pull out of it. Because if you're anything like me, that like I can really slide deep into stuff, like I could sit there too long, and it's not healthy for me to sit there too long,
So it forces you to feel different feelings.
Absolutely.
I see.
Absolutely.
So for your first pivotal point, you talk about being in the hospital in second grade. Can you like go into more detail about like that whole story and why you chose it?
That's a podcast in and of itself because it's a very long one, but I had Stevens-Johnson syndrome when I was in second grade.
And what is that?
Long story short, it's like the worst allergic reaction to your own body possible. So I had chickenpox for a second time. I don't have an immunity towards it for whatever reason. It's actually kind of a family trait, and one that I wasn't willing to risk with my kids.
Yeah.
So they got the vaccination when that came out. And you guys were young, which was nice. So chickenpox wasn't a huge deal like it was like in the 70s and 80s when I was raised. So what happens in Stevens-Johnson's is something is triggered, some virus, some antibiotic or something is introduced to your body. And instead of your white blood cells, which typically goes after whatever the infection is or whatever is causing that reaction, it went after healthy mucous membranes. So my eyes, my skin, my lungs, my mouth. So I looked like a burn patient. Like my skin would just slough off. Like I had to be Vaseline so I wouldn't stick to sheets. Not to be too graphic, but that's what it was.
Wow.
So like my eyelids, fused shut. I mean, I'm a child of boomer parents, so they were young. They were in the 20s dealing with a child that their doctors were like, she's not going to last the night, because I was coding regularly. Long story short, I survived what nobody thought I would survive, especially because I was given a late diagnosis. It took them a lot longer than they should have to diagnose it. So everybody was like, no, she's not going to walk away from this. And if she does, she's going to have all these extra issues. And one of the issues was my eyes, because it really hit my eyes. And to this day, I don't go outside without sunglasses, and when I was younger, it was way worse. So going through the hospital stuff and coming home, and I did come home after a lengthy stay in a hospital, and it was kind of like, well, she's going to make it or she's not. We've done all we can at this point. Like, she's either going to make it or she's not. I was a self-avowed tomboy living in Georgia, lived in the woods. Like, I lived for playing kickball. The neighborhood was filled with boys. There were only I think 3 girls that lived in the neighborhood, one of which was very much girly, one wasn't. Honestly, my favorite thing was just to kind of follow my big brother around and his friends, And that really stopped at that point for a while because I couldn't go outside much. And music became my solace. I also had issues with atrophied muscles because I didn't use them being in the hospital for so long. So I would roller skate in the garage with the door shut. And I would roller skate to AC/DC, to Blondie, to Led Zeppelin, to Pink Floyd.
And this was before you were in the hospital?
This was after.
This was
me getting well again, because the world of being outside wasn't available to me for a while.
So music was like your guidance to recovery.
Absolutely.
In a way. And would you say that it also had an impact while you were in the hospital, or did it more come after?
There's good and bad, right? That was the year that Saturday Night Light Fever came out with John Travolta.
Oh.
Right?
And a great soundtrack.
It is a great soundtrack. And it's triggering as fuck to me because, I remember it being played all the time, and it was a record I had. So, I remember it before and I remember it after. Whereas a lot of these artists, I remember more after. because where I could get my energy out would be like at the roller rink, and you'd have Joan Jett playing, and you'd have, Queen playing and all that kind of stuff. And later, like my one friend that was, tomboyish like me, we really were into Blondie. And she was an amazing gymnast. Amazing. Like Mary Lou Retton, kind of like she was on the path, and if she hadn't broken a femur at one point in time, she probably could have been, right? But we would play Blondie over and over and over again. And it got me moving. I mean, it was inside, but it got me moving. And it really was very helpful to me, getting my strength back up.
Was it any of like what she would say in the songs?
I just, there was something about Blondie that was a little different to me than like Joan Jett or the Pretenders or, other bands that were, okay, I am a self-avowed feminist. I will say that. And a lot of people might get cringy when I say that. What I mean by that is that there are obviously inherent differences between men and women, right? Yeah. And I think that we're also in a time where there's a lot of fluidity there as well. That being said, I was raised the belief that regardless, women and men are equal. Like one isn't inherently better than other.
Yeah.
One might be typically stronger, one might typically be more nurturing, but we're equal, right? So as a girl, like I gravitated towards female singers because it was like, and Blondie like had like an edge to it that had a skew. And I think throughout life, I've looked for artists that had a little bit of a different slant on stuff. Like if you go through the album with Blondie, there's like a little bit of punk, a little bit of disco, a little bit of pop, but there's rock through it the whole time. You know what I mean? So every song had like a flavor to it. Going back, and when you asked me to do this, of course I'm listening to the music again and kind of reliving some stuff. I don't know if it's an Easter egg, if it was intentional or not, and I know you, so I know you'll go back and listen. So Blondie's album dropped in 78. The Wall dropped in 79, okay? There's a song by Blondie on that album called Hanging on the Telephone, and I just caught this a couple weeks, right after we messaged each other, that starts with the phone ring. 79, Young Lust comes out on The Wall, has the same ring at the end. And I listened to them back to back. And I had thought because I'm like, that ring sounds really familiar. What's it from, right? And I went back and I'm like, I know it's Pink Floyd. I know it's The Wall. Where is it coming from?
Yeah.
And I came across it and I almost missed it because I was thinking it starts with it.
Yeah.
But Young Lust ends with that whole phone call, like, ma'am, are you getting through? Like, that whole conversation that's kind of like in the background with that murr sound, right? But then Hanging on the Telephone starts with that. So if you listen to Hanging on the Telephone followed by Young Lust, it makes me wonder, like, was that an intentional thing? Because very different styles in music, but subject matter, if you read the lyrics, they kind of flow into each other. I have no idea if it's just a coincidence that I found, or if it's like a 70s Easter egg music style, I don't know. But I find it fascinating that I can like look at it and go back and go, huh?
I think it is kind of a cool coincidence to have figured that out, because I feel like I look more with these Easter eggs within the artists themselves. Like an example that I think of, and this is a completely different genre, in hip hop, there's a song by Kendrick Lamar called Chapter 6, and the background instrumentation is also being played at the end of one of his songs on his To Pimp a Butterfly album, and it's called The Black or the Berry. And at the end of the song, it has the same instrumental that was played in one of his previous albums when he had like just started becoming like a major artist. So I thought that was kind of interesting that I was able to hear that same sound from one of his other songs, but like played in a little bit of a different way later on in his career, just kind of like foreshadowing what he was talking about before,
right.
Or referencing what he was talking about before.
Right.
And there are so many coincidences with artists having similar songs and connections within music. There's another one that I was thinking about. I know that we had like talked about Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus, but to like talk about Taylor Swift, she on the Midnights album, there's a song called Sweet Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was somebody that was credited for like some songwriting credits, and it was under like an alias, but no one really knew who the person was. And that alias, and I don't remember the exact initials, but it was the same alias that has been used in other songs by Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney helped write that song with Taylor Swift, but it's never credited to him. So
What a guy.
I'm sure that what had happened with Blondie and Pink Floyd, it probably was intentional.
Because Pink Floyd, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe The Wall was recorded in LA, wasn't it?
I'm not entirely sure.
So somebody will correct me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think I read that at some point. That's where Blondie was recording, I believe. And if you look at the date, it's like 1 year almost to the day difference of when those albums were released. And I can't imagine Pink Floyd, like artists, musicians are very aware of what other artists are doing.
Oh, for sure.
You know? So it wouldn't surprise me if they hadn't heard that and been like, "Man, that's cool," you know, with their British accents, you know, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, I wonder if we can wrap it in there, you know, and give a little nod. Because a lot of her stuff did kind of edge more into that Pink Floyd kind of world, you know. It was a toe dip. Like, there was a little bit of, like, European punk in there. There was a little bit. And not that, you know, Pink Floyd's punk by any means, but, like, Pink Floyd is a genre of itself. In my mind.
Yeah.
It really is. You have your concept albums, you know, you have your animals. It is a huge deal. Yeah, she's going to do a thing. No. So, anyways.
So then you pretty much grew up with the classic rock being like the main genre.
Yeah, like picture roller rink in the 70s. Yeah, that was my world. You know, Joan Jett, AC/DC, and you know, some of those things like just also felt adult. Like there weren't kid bands back then. There weren't, right? So hearing, you know, AC/DC cuss was like, oh, this is great stuff, right? Like it was fun to skate to, and you had Queen. So that stuff, that music gave me an out that I used to have when I was out playing in the woods.
I see.
You know, and later, I mean, I was able to pick that back up when my eyes healed up a bit. There was a solid year and a half where like I had no PE. I couldn't go out. I had to find other avenues to occupy myself other than being physically outside, you know. If you lived in the South in the 70s, you lived it outside. You just did. That's the typical hose drinking kids came from. That was the quintessential summer. But I couldn't for a year, you know, like I just couldn't. So music really helped me get through it, you know.
That's awesome. And leading into your next pivotal point, it was also within your childhood, but later on, it was when you were 17, you had gone to rehab. Like, rehab for what?
You're like, I didn't know this.
Like, and like also, what music? There's a lot of things that were affecting that time period with the music you're listening to, with Four Non-Blondes. Like, were there other artists too?
Yeah, at 17, I landed my butt in rehab because of meth. Okay. It's one of those that, like, if you play around with it long enough, if you have any addictive qualities in your body, it's hard not to trigger it, right? Yeah, I have an addictive family, is what it is. Everybody's well. So I really lucked out that everybody got off the junk and are doing really well. So that being said, and I'm not saying meth was my thing in the family. It wasn't everybody else's.
How did you get into it?
When I had the Stevens-Johnson syndrome, I lived in a really small town in Georgia, right? Where everybody knew what happened. Where I wasn't bullied because everybody knew. I fought for my life. Like, I came out and I had very short hair and very red skin and my eyes never looked right. I was never bullied. Never bullied. Everybody knew. Didn't worry about it at school. Didn't, you know, people were good about it all the way around. Moving to Arizona, and this is nothing, you know, parents move because they have to, because they have new jobs, new opportunities, right? I don't regret moving here, but it was, holy cow, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Kids cannot be crueler. They cannot. Not only was I new, my parents, bless their hearts, we moved to Scottsdale, and I was in a Paradise Valley school. I looked straight out of Dukes of Hazzard, okay, right? And went to a school at the base of Camelback Mountain. Everybody was wearing Vans, Bermuda shorts, and polos. I stood out. I had a really strong Southern drawl because I grew up there, right? People were talking Valley Girl at the time, and life became miserable. in a way that I did not know was possible. And I had very beautiful parents. I didn't want them to know how much I struggled. So I kept a lot of that to myself. My brother saw it. I have a bigger brother, my favorite person in the world. My kids will kill me for saying that, but they know. He did his best to kind of watch out for me, but he was older than me. So, there were only a couple of years in our schooling that we were in the same school together, but 6th grade was one of them. So, yeah, I got into drugs then, especially 7th grade. What I know now, I didn't know then. I was really searching for a way to feel better. So drugs in general was about me medicating myself. And yeah, some bands later on, so, like in 7th and 8th grade, I guarantee you whatever the popular kids were listening to, I was not. Because in my mind, they were assholes. So I didn't want to have anything to do with the pop culture that was being listened to by those groups of people, right? So no, I didn't listen to Michael Jackson. No, I didn't listen to Madonna. No, I mean, I did, but I didn't. Like, it wasn't like something I celebrated. What I was listening to was, Iron Maiden, Ozzy Osbourne, Rush, Billy Idol, Sex Pistols, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. They were all, into, like, going into high school, they were into Thompson Twins and Duran Duran and all that kind of stuff. And none of that struck a chord for me. So I did okay in high school because I regulated myself pretty well. So I wasn't anxious. I was able to, like, kind of flutter around the wings, right? Like, I was a straight A kind of student. So I was the kid that, like, the other stoners would cheat off of, and I could also fit in with the smart kids, the kids that were honor roll kind of kids. I did AP classes, all that kind of stuff. And I had the other side of me, the other side of me that was in drug houses listening to, Dark Side of the Moon over and over and over again. So that was a case where sometimes music really kind of accentuated the darkness that was inside of me, the sadness, the deep hurt, the deep pain, I got clean at 17. My parents nabbed me, were like, off you go, and I'm really glad I never touched meth again, which was the big deal. So that was in 89. There is a bit of a differentiation. Because I was able to medicate myself, self-medicate so well, man, the first 3 years of me being clean, they were some of the hardest because I wasn't medicated. And I really needed to be, back then. I was in bad shape. To most people from the outside, I looked worse off of drugs than I did on drugs because I was spiraling out. And it took me a while to kind of regulate that and figure that out. And gratefully, there was grunge at that point for me to kind of dive into.
So it came in like saving you in a way.
It was. So, like, there's a disconnect from between me getting clean in 89 and me talking about Four Non Blondes, which that album dropped in 92. But that's really where, like, I started feeling me again, like I was able to shake some of the stuff and regulate myself better and surround myself with healthier people and be in healthier relationships and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, it was grunge that kind of got me out of it. At my soul, like when people say, what is your favorite genre? It is rock grunge. That is it for me because it really made such an impact in my life. But it was just really beginning to roll at that point. There were a lot of artists that I could have gone to. And again, me going back to females. And we were talking about this beforehand. By no means am I just attracted to female bands or female leads. What I find fascinating, though, about women in rock, because women, statistically speaking, are more successful in pop. I mean, you've got Taylor Swift proving that quite well, right? You have very successful women rap artists, hip hop artists, country artists. Rock seems to be the harder one to really get into. But I think that's a blessing because the females that are in rock that aren't traditional rock, like the Joan Jett or whatever, they have to kind of bend it to fit in to kind of stand out. And I like that bend. You have the Bonnie Raitt where there's, wow, that's a lot of blues in there, She's a phenomenal guitarist. Phenomenal, like B.B. King phenomenal, right? I talk about, Four Non Blondes. Some of her stuff, their stuff like comes off like disco-y. Some of it comes off very punk. Some of it comes off very grunge. And you're like, I'm not quite sure. And I played it for you. Like, yeah, I do know that song. It's a smaller band. It was bigger back in the day. You know, people that are Gen Xers will know Four Non Blondes if you were in the scene at all. It felt good. It was music that was like, had anger to it. Like, yeah, what's up? You know, the song, What's Up? What's up with this world? Why? Like, I could relate to that. And I was at a space emotionally where I could hear it, but not feel victim-y about it, if that makes sense. And I needed to not feel victim-y anymore.
I think it's interesting that you say victim-y, because if you think about it, music, I feel like it never really puts you in a bad place unless you have something bad associated with it. And when grunge came in, like I don't even really know what that was like, but
it was insane.
From what I can imagine,
1990, like there were some albums that just dropped.
Oh, yeah.
That like were like, it was like an instantaneous. You had 9 Inch Nails drop. You had one of Metallica's best albums, in my opinion, drop. You had Pearl Jam. You had Soundgarden. You had Nirvana. Like all of that dropping. It was insane. It was like a birth of music. It really was.
To be able to live through that with also having these super intense emotions that you're just trying to understand with yourself and just like what has happened in your life, I'm sure it was like a holy shit, this is real.
Yeah.
I've never had these feelings before. Like I didn't know that I could feel validated and be uncomfortable of like what I don't know. Like,
right.
You know, like I'm sure it was just incredible to have like been living through that.
It was. I mean, and I think for me, the reason why grunge was so impactful was because for a long time, I couldn't listen to Pink Floyd because of the places that I had been. Because of so many drug houses that I had stayed in that would play Pink Floyd front to back, front to back, front to back. Like it became a negative thing, and I've had to reprogram myself.
So you have re-listened to the music.
Yeah.
Okay. So then let me ask you about the Saturday Night Fever album. Did you end up learning how to like it?
No.
Okay.
I mean, yes, I do. Like there's a part of me that listens to it and goes, wow, yeah, great music, fun, party, right? Then there's a memory. It'll just come up, and I'm unable to really get past that. But I think that because Saturday Night Fever was niche-y, less so than I think Pink Floyd. Like Pink Floyd required me to go through it because Pink Floyd is amazing. Like it's not one that you just want to put away and put in a drawer and leave alone for the rest of your life. Like you want to come back to it, you know? And part of what that was like I had kids that were into Pink Floyd. And they would play it. And so, you know, it kind of encouraged me, forced me, if you will. And Cameron was a big one on that. He was always playing it.
Oh, yeah.
So I kind of really needed to address it, you know, because it was in my face. But you're right. Like when it comes to Saturday Night Fever, I still I can listen to it, and probably about a couple minutes in, there's a memory that'll pop up.
That's so interesting. You can't get past certain music if it's that traumatic of a memory that you have associated with it.
And honestly, there is no, I mean, I could talk about the bullying, I can talk about the drug addiction, nothing compares to what I went through as a kid, and consequently still go through, because it left, you know, I mean, it's not like it ever goes away. It's a syndrome, so it's something that can flare up if I take the wrong antibiotic. I have medication on board to shut that down, because it's almost like an anaphylactic kind of thing. Like, it's this or we're going straight to the hospital kind of thing.
Later on in your life, you meet your ex-husband, and what's his name? Jason. So you and Jason started dating when?
Oh, I want to say 92.
So it was around the same time that
I was beginning to...
The Four Non Blondes came into your life. Okay. So did he come in with a different genre of music that he like influenced you with, or was it more of like the same? Like, tell me more about that.
He was a much harder hitter. He was in a band. He was the bass player. You know, the band that he was in, you know, very heavy. I've heard it explained a million different ways. I don't know how to explain it. Rage-ish. Pantera, maybe. The original drummer that he moved out here with, like, was a huge Pantera fan. And I loved Pantera, but I didn't have many people to listen to it with. And so they were kind of surprised I was, like, down with it. And it really kind of brought out more of that really heavy stuff.
So you get introduced to it, and then he just is like, all right, let me pull you all the way in.
Exactly. And their music was really heavy, and I loved it. And, we started, this was the age of the Lollapaloozas, and we would go to the shows, and it'd be an all-day event, and that's where we were introduced to Rage Against the Machine, which was insane. Like, it was a golden era for music. It really was, at least for me. I mean, grunge was not everybody's thing. It was my thing, and I loved the spin-offs with it. Like, we could talk about, like, the big five, right? We could talk about Nirvana, we could talk about Soundgarden, we could talk about all that. There was also L7, which was an all-female group, right? Which, if you wanted to tickle your I want all-female kind of sound that's heavy, you can go that direction. I like things that were a little off, and Four Non Blondes was one of them. Lollapalooza originally, like, had L7 and all that, like, in their lineup. And eventually, the women kind of drifted off, and it became Lilith Fair. There was Lollapalooza, and then there was Lilith Fair. Honestly, I still went to Lollapalooza. That was kind of my thing. But there was a reason as to why Lilith Fair was open. It's because it was still the 90s, and there was still a lot of negativity regarding sexuality, unfortunately. And I think the women just were like, gay or not, we don't feel like being called lesbos, and so that was thrown around at Lollapaloozas, whether we liked it or not. That was another reason for me to be like, because I am kind of an activist in the world. Like, I believe in human rights and equality and all that good stuff. And I do like to give love to the ladies.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it gives me a lot back. My husband definitely did have a lot to do with, me getting into more heavier music. Heavier, obviously, than Four Non Blondes or Pearl Jam, that kind of stuff. Like, that's, pretty obvious. There was a lot more Metallica being played. It was great. It was all good stuff,
So later on, you guys get married, and the music is still prevalent.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Colin and Michaela come into your life.
Yeah.
And their musical influence, I'm sure, played a huge role on how you were able to perceive things around you, right?
For sure.
The relationship that you have with music with your kids and your past husband, like, how did that, like, all, like, mesh together, I guess?
It was easy. Like, there were some things that, like, my ex and I were kind of on the same spot with. Like, we did not put Barney on for the kids. Like, that was not our thing. Teletubbies just amused me. So it didn't bother me when the kids were watching it. It drove my ex nuts. He was just like, I just can't. I'm like, I don't know what I'm watching, but I can't like look away. Music. But for the music, so the I love you, you love me, that kind of stuff. That wasn't prevalent in my house.
Gotcha.
Like, they heard what we were listening to.
Gotcha. So
they went to the studio with Jason. They would go to practice with Jason. Like, they had that.
So from, like, a young age, they were always having music incorporated in their life. Okay.
Absolutely. And it's to this day, like, even just last week, my daughter, I was hanging out with her, and she was like, check out this band. It's called In the Moment. I don't know if you know them. It's a female singer. Hits super hard, because I was talking about this and about how women, like, kind of struggle with that hitting hard part. Yeah. And she's like, Mom, listen to this. And I love that we can still have that back and forth.
For sure.
And so we had that early on, and yes, did my kids like some stuff that I wasn't into? Of course, because they're going to school. They have their own friends. Did my daughter go to a Jonas Brothers concert? Maybe a mom was brought along with it. It is what it is, you know?
So how old were your kids when you, like, brought them to their first concerts?
So my son, that was a fun one. I brought actually Colin and Cameron to Salt Lake City. Oh, I want to say when he was 12. They were 12, 13. We went up, and it was his first concert, and I love this. This is what's amazing. So that year, I decided Christmas presents weren't going to be things. They were going to be experiences. So my daughter and I were really, like, fascinated with, like, a couple of cellists. They're called two cellists that were Eastern European. I believe one's Croatian, one's something like Albanian or something like that. They look like they could have been out of a Twilight movie, right? And they would play covers, but they would do it with amazing talent. Like, they would play AC/DC on cellos. Like, it was nuts, right? So I brought her up for that, but I don't believe that was her first concert. I believe her first concert wasn't with me. I'd have to ask her, to be honest. But I remember Colin specifically because A, day. It was a long drive, right? It was a overnighter. You know, we drove all the way up to Salt Lake, you know, kind of thing. And I brought, you know, Cameron, and we met one of his friends up there. We went to go see Hollywood Undead. And I didn't know much about Hollywood Undead, you know, but I'm going to a concert, so I'm going to educate myself. So I start listening, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay, I see a little bit of, you know, Rage, a little bit of Tool, a little bit of rapping in there, you know, like kind of stuff like, you know, I'm like, okay, I see your influences. I see you, you know, I get it. I can do this. You know, this isn't totally outside of my realm. We get there. We end up staying at the same hotel as they were staying at, right? And the kids realize that pretty quick. So I've never known such like lobby rats in my life as Cameron and Colin. Yeah. Waiting for like what Johnny Two Tears or whatever it is, you know, or Danny to come in or whatever. But apparently I was on an elevator because I know them from their masks, right? I don't know their faces.
Yeah.
You know, the videos I watch, like they're masked, right? And I get out of the elevator. The kids are like, their eyes are like, do you know who you're on the elevator with? I'm like, no, probably some guy that's going to be at the concert because he's all tatted up, right? Like, that was Danny. And I'm like, okay, you want to give me some more specifics? And they're like, and I'm like, well, I'm glad I didn't ask them or say, hey, I'll see you at the concert tonight, you know? But I was like, in true fashion, I take my concert seriously. Like every concert I go, I'm wearing Doc Martens. You know, I look like an old grunge flashback. I've got probably flannel wrapped around my waist. And at the time I had bright red flaming hair. Like there was no missing me. There was a point where we're in line where Danny actually like waved at me because I did stand out and I'm amongst a bunch of younger kids. And I waved back and the girls that were on each side of us were like, oh, you know Danny? And I was like, oh yeah, we go way back. And I could just see Colin just like shaking his head like, oh, mom's doing her shit again. Oh my God. Stop. Just stop. I think Sean David was having a heart attack. Like it was funny. It was like, to me, it was funny. And yeah, so we got to do the concert thing. We went to the concert. My son and Cameron my son and Sean David ditched me. I told them, don't get into a pit.
Did they get in the pit?
Of course they placed themselves right where there was going to be a pit. And I'm like, you're 12 years old and you got it. And at this time, Colin had the fro going on.
It was
so I
huge.
could look back and I could see where he was at any time. I mean,
you never had a problem finding him.
No, so there's me and Cameron, and we're pretty close up front, and Cameron's laughing because we're next to another mom who's with her 12-year-old girls, right? And Cameron is with all the girls.
Of course he is.
And me and the mom are like looking around at the others like, y'all have fun, but we're like 4 feet from the stage. Y'all start getting rowdy, elbows are getting thrown. It did happen.
Oh my God. So you got in a
I did.
What's it called? Like not a fight.
Somebody started trying to start a mosh pit.
Right
behind me. And it's too close to the stage.
Yeah.
And he came at, and it twisted my body. And all I could think of was, I've got to protect Cameron. I have to bring him home alive, you know? And I just happened to be in a position where I was twisted, but my feet were planted because I know the stance. You know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm already twisted. His face was right there. And I just elbowed him in the face, and they carried him out because they're like, yeah, he's causing problems.
Cameron?
No.
Oh.
I did.
Oh, you got kicked out.
No, I didn't. No, this guy, this grown-ass man who was trying to start a mosh pit 3 feet from the stage, which you don't do because people will get head injuries, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, know your protocols when it comes to mosh pits. Like, it's in the center. It's not on the stage,
for sure,
right?
Yeah.
And here's two moms that don't know each other but have 4, 12-year-olds that we're like taking care of, right? And this guy like is like on top of us, and I just clocked him, and the people behind were like, yeah, we're taking care of him, he's out. So they were like almost crowd surfing him out. So it was fascinating to me that a group of and this is Hollywood Undead, like they were taking care of my kids. Like they understood. Like
really?
I'm like,
and these were the fans.
Like these were the fans. Like it was just one guy. one guy that was trying to start a mosh pit in a very stupid space to do it, right? I'm like, go ahead, do it back where my son is, because like he's in the right space at least.
Yeah.
You know, not right up against the stage, right? So anyways, long story short, concert's over. My son decides he wants to be my kid again.
Yeah.
He's like, Mom could be a bit much. So like he's back with me, right? And we get back to the hotel. I think Cameron ran up to get a guitar.
Yeah.
And they're back downstairs in the lobby. And in comes, Johnny and Danny.
Yeah.
And they walk up to them. They look at me like, what do you think, Mom? And I knew that Danny knew that I didn't know who he was to begin with, but now I do, right? I'm like, totally loved it. I come from this era. I can see where you... But then they sat down and hung out with the boys.
They've never told me about this. This is so cool.
There's a selfie of Johnny with my son.
Oh, I'm sure.
And he offered it. Like, it was like, hey, do you want a picture? At some point, I'm like, I'm just going to let the boys just enjoy it without Mom. So I'm like, hey, just, don't be too late. And when they came back up, like my son was like, hey, Johnny wanted me to tell you thank you for bringing us all the way up here and what an amazing mom you are. And I was like, oh. But yeah, it was fun. Like it really shows you, like they could have just easily just gone off to their hotel room and done their post-concert thing, get high or whatever.
Yeah.
No, they spent time with a couple of 12-year-olds. Just hanging out, playing on the guitar. Like, that is so super cool.
That's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
It doesn't happen.
No,
it's better than a backstage pass. They chose that. Whereas, I'm going to go back, loop it to the two cellos with my daughter. When we were in line to do, like, the whole autograph thing, my daughter was 17, maybe, at the time. Yeah, 17. And my brother was with us on that because he wanted to do the road trip and he was mad. So I'm like, okay, I'll get you a ticket too, right? So she and I, of course, are fangirling over these two cellos, right? Because they are gorgeous specimens of human beings, right?
Yeah.
On the outside. We get there, he looks up and looks at my daughter. She's a beautiful young lady, right? And he's like, hey, let's have sex in front of a lot of people.
Wow.
Like everybody in line, people, because you can either get your pictures, you can take pictures or you can get an autograph. So there's people that are taking pictures. And I look at him because he's like signing mine, but he's looking at her. And I'm like, I'm her mom. And he looks at me and looks at her and goes, oh, you too. We all. And I was like...
He doubled down.
He doubled down. Like, are you kidding me? It really taught me in the moment that these were classically, like they used to open for Elton John, like classically trained cellists. Amazing musicians, right? Well-versed, trained in the arts, with horrible values and an inability to like be appropriate. Like propositioning an underaged female with her mother. Whereas Hollywood Undead, tattoos and all, were so amazing to the kids, to the 12-year-olds.
It's funny that the stereotypical group ended up being, or I guess the group that you would think
would be the assholes or whatever
aren't. And there end up being
they were like real people to my kids.
Same. I mean,
Love it.
You heard the same thing in Colin's episode. It's a bunch of people that are a bunch of dorks, like in the heavy metal and like grunge industry. Like they're not people that are trying to hurt others. They're trying to figure out ways to like express their emotions in an appropriate manner that isn't hurting anyone. That's healthy, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that is so cool.
Yeah.
It comes back to that.
Yeah. So that's where he gets probably some of that, because his first experience at a concert was as good as it's gonna get. Like seriously, like can you imagine?
What an incredible experience to have been. I mean, to be a mother and watch your kid like have his dream come true.
I
like,
loved it.
Let's say that, like that in itself is cool.
I loved it.
But then to be able to like hang out with the musicians that you're paying to go see in the first place,
right?
Like that's once in a lifetime.
It really was. It was so much fun, and so the music really did. Like I remember, like literally, like on the way up, we were driving through probably Winslow or something. We stopped at a Walmart because we need to stretch our legs and all that kind of stuff. And there's Cameron going through all the albums. Yeah. And he like picks up. I'm like, I told them both, because it was back in the day of the CDs, like, hey, you guys pick up some music. Let's have some new music. Animals, he picks up. Yeah.
That's still his favorite Pink Floyd album to this day.
It is. Yeah. And he was like, okay. And I'm like, okay. And that was one of those moments where I'm like, okay, I'm going to reintroduce myself to this. Listen to it differently. It's okay.
it changed the game.
It kind of did.
Yeah.
It was part of, like, Cameron was kind of like me getting back because of how passionate he always was about Pink Floyd, right? Kind of helped me get through that.
So there's a couple more things I want to talk about because we've covered a lot of stuff. And I know that in Colin's episode, him and I talk a lot about Braxton and our relationship with him and like growing up and stuff. And I really want to get your perspective on him living with you guys and the type of relationship that y'all had. What was Braxton like with you?
It was lovely. Braxton will always have a special spot in my heart. It was nice. What I love about my son and his friends is you guys feed off of each other, right? So when there's another musician in the house, and this is all during, you know, like lockdown times, essentially, right? It would be lovely to just hear him strumming on the guitar, and then I might hear my son coming in on it, right? Or him always walking around with his drumsticks, if I can talk, which I have to share. I do have a little bit of musician in me. It's just that because of change in money, I was never able to really pursue it. Like, I used to play the guitar once upon a time. Like, I had lessons as a child. I obviously am glad, because I do massage now, I can't have calluses on my fingers. That wouldn't work. But, you know, I played the drums for a while. Like, you know, so it was comfortable, and I can appreciate it a lot because I just loved it. Loved having Braxton around. Like, it was a joy to have him in the house. There was always a smile there. In retrospect, I wish that I knew how much pain he was in, you know. But he never showed that. Like, I knew it. Like, there was a part of me, the mom part of me, that could just sense it. But he always wanted to be happy, and he always wanted to have a smile on his face. He always wanted to make other people feel happy and all that. It was easy having him at my place. It was never hard. There was never a moment where I was, like, frustrated with having him at the house. Other people, yeah. Not him, though. He was easy. So, yeah, I miss him.
You miss him too?
She's a chatterbox. I'm so sorry.
You're okay. It'll be great to put in the episode.
It's a little bit extra, you know. If I pet her, maybe she won't meow as much. So hi, you're getting your pets. I've always loved having music in my house, and honestly, at the end of the day, my favorite music was my kids' music when they were playing. Whether it was my son playing trombone or whatever, the guitar, you know, messing around with whatever it was, that the musical instrument du jour for Colin, or when Cameron was over. Like, my favorite music has always been whatever my kids came up with on their own, if that makes sense.
You're living through everyone.
Yeah.
Through the music they listen to.
And not only that, but the music that they play. Like, they physically play.
They play, yeah.
You know, especially when Braxton and Cameron were around, like, they would bring that side of Colin out a little bit more. And I loved it. So I listened to way more music than I watched TV.
Yeah.
Way
me too.
more.
Me too.
Like, by far. So it's been not background in my life, it's been woven into the fabric of my life. It's hard to kind of take things out, you know.
That makes sense. So now that we know pretty much like the general summary of Christina Clark and how music has made you who you are, how often do you get the chance to like say something important to the world, where, not that you haven't already, but if you had like a specific phrase or like thing that you live by, or just a message that you want to say to everyone, like what do you want to tell everyone that you think they should know?
I think for me, and this is where I'm at today and have been for quite a bit, is we are human beings, right? I think our culture, our society kind of requires us to be human doings. And I think there's a difference. And I prefer to be a human being. So that goes into that realm of like, I don't live to work, I work to live. I think it's important to just be, like, to be aware of what's going on in your own body, in your own emotions, in your own health. Like, I think the importance of just being sometimes is overshadowed by the accomplishments, you know, that we do, because those are active, right? And I think sometimes going inside takes a little bit more effort, because sometimes we do things to distract us from what's on the inside. For me, when I have moments where I'm like, I just want it to be quiet, I want to be reflective and not have anything influence that reflection, I go into silence, because I'm just being. you know? So to me, I think it's important. Like, yes, we all like live in a world where, you know, we need to have our jobs. We need to be active. Like, there's no getting away from doing stuff, right? Like, I have to do my dishes. I have to do my laundry. I have to do my chores. I have to do stuff, right? And I think it's equally important, if not more so, to remember that we're human beings, not human doings, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's about having experiences outside of what you do. Right. More of like what you experience, because I feel like doing and experiencing are very different.
Yeah, you could, one is passive in nature and one is active. Like, you have to actively do something. And I don't think that we've flexed the muscle of being as much as doing. And I don't know if that's just because, like, you know, we have bills that we have to pay. We have ambitions and we want to make sure that we're set and all that kind of stuff. And all that's totally normal. For me, I find it very important to be very aware of me as a person and how I feel and how I'm feeling, and as opposed to just always being on the run and doing stuff.
Well, I think that's great advice that everyone should really consider, especially because we get so distracted with everything happening around us that we don't get to really stop and look in front and see, like, what can we appreciate? What can we process and feel? Who can we do those things with? You know, like, how do you want to spend your time outside of your work life?
Absolutely. So, like, how do you want to be?
Yeah. So I'm really grateful that you presented that perspective, because that hasn't been talked about enough. So yeah. And thank you so much for coming on Sounds of Living. And I really believe that the audience is going to connect well with this episode.
Oh, well, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed actually the time leading up to it and looking into the music that, you know, like, influenced me for years throughout my life, and kind of taking a walk down memory lane with what music is kind of to me.
Thank you again. And to all the listeners out there, I wish you happiness and good health, and we'll see you next episode.